We're excited to welcome you all today to our discussion on moving from food access to food justice. This is the 7th installment of the CSA Ideas Lab, which is a regular discussion series focused on topics to help CSA farmers and farmer support organizations. Quick intro, my name is Liv Froelich. I'm the program manager at Fair Share CSA Coalition, and I'm also a member of the CSA Innovation Network's Equity and Access Working Group. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time and aren't too familiar with the Innovation Network, the Innovation Network is a national community of practice for farmers and farmer support organizations, and it's comprised currently of a group of 16 organizations listed here from across the country. A little bit about what we do. We work to build awareness of the value of CSA for consumers, and we do that through a number of different ways, but the primary work that we do is to act as a platform for sharing research, resources, and ideas to address emerging CSA issues. So that's the Ideas Lab, which you're currently all on. We have a robust resource library for farmers and support organizations, on our website. And we can go to the next slide. One such resource that we actually want to talk about really quickly before we jump into today's topic is a really awesome educational video series for aspiring and beginning CSA farmers called CSA Starts Here. This series was created by a team of 5 CSA farmers in the Midwest with funding from North Central SARE. They were produced independently of the Innovation Network, but you can find all of these videos on our website, CSAinnovationnetwork.org. They cover a ton of different topics. You can watch them all at once, sort of as a training, or find topics that you find interesting, everything from should I start a CSA farm to creating a CSA crop plan, marketing your CSA, managing stress on the farm. Super valuable resources. There's a handbook that accompanies these videos. So please check it out. Share it with folks that you think might find it interesting. Really valuable stuff. Okay, jumping in today's program. So we've asked you all to join us today in a conversation that we've been struggling with in our respective organizations as a working group and as a network. And that is how we move away from a food access framework to food justice framework when we are talking about CSA. When we began the network a few years ago, our working group was focused predominantly on economic access, and our participating members brought expertise on running low-income access programs, researching the value of CSA, and more. However, by our second year, we recognize that while cost, affordability, payment methods are certainly all factors to CSA accessibility, we needed to focus on the larger impacts of systemic oppression and racism in determining who can and cannot participate in our local food systems. And by focusing solely on access, we're perpetuating those disparities that exist in the dominant food system. So today, my colleague Kate will get a little bit more into this, but CSA in the US serves a predominantly white farmer and consumer audience. This is reflected in our network, our working group, and the relationships that we do and don't have. So as the network has been working to identify gaps in knowledge and create resources that will be valuable for CSA farmers and organizations, that has been limited by the spheres that we do and don't represent. So for those of you who have attended Ideas Labs in the past, they've been more presentation style. And today will be a little bit different because this is an area where we are not experts, and we're really looking for a collective learning experience. My colleague Kate will start us off by laying a little bit of groundwork about what we do know. So the history of CSA, the current state of CSA, and then we'll hold space for a smaller group conversation after that point about where we go from there. And we really want to hear from you all about areas that you or the organizations you represent may be struggling or facing success when it comes to shifting our relationship with food and land to center those who have been most excluded. And we hope that when you leave today, you'll come out with inspiration ideas from other folks that are on the line. And at least from a network standpoint, we'll really use today as a jumping off point and use what we learned to help develop resources for support organizations and growers that don't exist, as well as lift up examples of programs and initiatives that we hear about today in future ideas labs, as well as resources. So from the bottom of my heart, thanks again for coming. We're really excited to learn from one another. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Kate, who will take you along for the next 15, 20 minutes.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Liv. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Ann Stryker. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling from the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming in Cold Spring, New York. And I also work with the Hudson Valley CSA Coalition, which is how we're connected to the CSA Innovation Network. I would like to begin this presentation with a land acknowledgement, because it's always important to recognize the legacy of our land and the history of our country, but I think it's particularly essential when we're discussing issues of food sovereignty and social justice. So I'm just going to read from the screen here. We are gathered wherever we are on Indigenous land. I myself am speaking to you from unceded Lenape territory, from a town now known as Cold Spring, New York. As we work to support thriving and equitable food systems in our regions, we recognize that being in right relationship to the land that was stolen from Indigenous peoples through colonization, genocide, and forced expulsion, is crucial to our success. I ask that we give reverence and gratitude to Indigenous peoples as stewards of this land, both historically and today, and hold that legacy at the forefront of our minds. We cannot undo the centuries of violence enacted upon Indigenous peoples and people of color that are part of the origin of the dominant food system of this country, a food system that today causes people of color to disproportionately suffer from food insecurity. We can, however, commit ourselves to building a more equitable food system today and in the future by uplifting and resourcing the leadership of Indigenous people and people of color, and through this work to attempt to honor the legacy of the land's Indigenous stewards. Next slide, please. Now I want to dive into more specifically the history of CSA. And why I think this history matters is that a key element in fighting for racial justice is to tell the whole story, to revisit the histories we have learned, many of which we have come to realize are written with a Eurocentric, white supremacist, patriarchal lens, and to delve deeper, elevating the voices and perspectives of historically marginalized communities. Through our work with the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming and the Hudson Valley CSA Coalition, the CSA Innovation Network has explored the history of community-supported agriculture, or CSA, in the United States and globally, observing both where credit has been predominantly given and where credit is long overdue. By no means is this a comprehensive history. I'm sure that there are still stories left untold, but we hope that this gives you, CSA farmers, CSA members, and technical assistance providers alike, a new vantage point from which to understand the system we're all participating in. While I, as an individual, was compelled to piece together this history as thoroughly as possible and write a piece that would be useful for other people's learning, I just want to acknowledge that I'm not the expert of this work. I turned to many different sources in my research, many of which were authored by people of color, some dating back to the 1980s, some just from a couple of years ago. And I wanted to acknowledge that, and you'll also see a list of resources that I referred to at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so here we're diving into the timeline. The dawn of CSA in the United States is most commonly attributed to Indian Line CSA, which is in South Egremont, Massachusetts, and Temple Wilton Community Farm in Wilton, New Hampshire, both founded in 1986 by European men. While these two farms have played undeniably large roles in the popularization of CSA in America, they're not the first in our country to have thought of the economic model, nor is Europe the first place in the world to have established agricultural memberships. Booker T. Whatley, a Black author, horticulturist, and professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama, identified 10 commandments he considered essential for successful farming in the 1960s and 70s. Included in these commandments was the concept of a clientele membership club, in which club members paid an upfront fee to pick their own produce all season long. This system enabled farmers to pay for necessary seed and equipment at the beginning of the season without taking out a loan. It saved growers time and effort required to harvest produce, and it granted club members agency in choosing the food they were eating. Now considered two separate farming models that can be used separately or in tandem, community-supported agriculture and pick your own, are foundational to many small to mid-sized farms and are only becoming more popular as demand for fresh local food continues to grow. And I just want to say here, I would highly recommend reading the interview with Booker T. Whatley in Mother Earth News from 1982. You'll learn so much and you'll be in awe of Booker T. Whatley's wisdom and foresight. At the same time that Booker T. Whatley was conducting research on intensive small-scale farming in the United States, CSA-like models were being independently established elsewhere in the world. In 1965, a group of Japanese women founded the Teike system. Emphasizing mutually supportive producer-consumer relationships, Teike built off of Japan's long history of economic cooperatives. It also reflected growing national concern over food safety and chemical contamination in the wake of Minamata disease, or methylmercury poisoning, that affected thousands, and gained additional momentum after the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown of 1986. To this day, farming cooperatives remain very popular in Japan, and the Japan Organic Agricultural Association elevates consumers and producers' shared commitment to elevating safe, healthily grown food in Japan. Cooperative farm economics began to take hold in Europe in the 1960s as well. Largely inspired by philosopher Rudolf Steiner's teachings on non-chemical agriculture, as well as the associative approach to economics, Germans Karl August Loos and Tröger and Hans Kohl established a community land trust called Gemeinnützige Landbau Forschungsgesellschaft in 1968. Dismantling power imbalances and encouraging equity, the land trust proposed a cooperative economic model called agriculturally cooperating community, in which non-farming community members granted loans to farmers. This form of financial cooperation ultimately led to membership programs. In Geneva, Switzerland, farmers inspired by the collective agriculture in Chile during the Allende administration of the 1970s founded a producer-consumer alliance called Les Jardins de Cocagne in 1978. And by the 1980s, there were proto-CSA programs developing across Germany and Switzerland. The CSA model traveled from Europe to the United States via Jan van der Tween, a Swiss biodynamic farmer, and Tröger Kohl. Temple Wilton Farm was founded by Kohl, Anthony Graham, and Lincoln Geiger in 1968. That same year, van der Tween introduced the idea to Robin van En, who founded Indian Line Farm. Van En would go on to publish a pamphlet entitled Basic Formula to Create Community-Supported Agriculture, thus coining and popularizing the term CSA, which we now all use today. CSA farms continued to grow in popularity in the United States in the late 1980s and 90s. A few CSA farms of note include Live Power Farm, which was the first CSA in California, Peacework Farm, which was co-founded by Elizabeth Henderson, a member of the CSA Innovation Network, Tuscaloosa CSA, a farm run by two queer women, which was the first CSA operation in the South, and Roxbury Farm, founded in 1990 as well, which was the first farm to truck CSA shares into New York City, which remains a huge market for many CSA growers in the Hudson Valley region and beyond. Finally, 1992 saw the creation of both CSA North America, a nonprofit clearinghouse organized by Robin Van En, and Fair Share CSA Coalition, which was founded by CSA members in Wisconsin who wanted better access to local organic food. Thus began the formal organizing of CSA farmers and members, which we continue to see today in spaces such as this one, the CSA Innovation Network. Next slide, please. Community-supported agriculture has clearly gone by multiple names around the world and has no one founder. But whether Japan's Teike, Booker T. Whatley's Clientele Membership Club, Togor and Ko's Agriculturally Cooperative Community, or Van En CSA, the model has universally prioritized financial security and viability for farmers, robust and healthy soils, and safe chemical-free food for community members. As the CSA model continues to gain momentum around the world and in the United States, the CSA Innovation Network is committed to telling CSA's history as completely as we can. The contribution of Booker T. Whatley to CSA in America has been especially overshadowed by those of European men. We will continue to uplift his story and will actively celebrate the many Black, Indigenous, and people of color farmers who carry on Whatley's agricultural legacy today. In this spirit, we are equally committed to making CSA, currently a model that predominantly serves middle-class white households, more accessible to all the members of our communities. And I think that that's why many of you are here during this CSA Ideas Lab today. So I'm really looking forward to discussion a bit later. Next slide. I just wanted to give a little analysis of what CSA looks like today, because we've been talking about the global history. So on the left side of this slide, you can see two pieces of market research, one conducted by the Hudson Valley CSA Coalition in 2019, and one conducted by University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension in conjunction with Fair Share CSA Coalition in 2017. And both of these market research studies showed that the vast majority of active CSA members were white, women, homeowners, well-educated, had high income levels, and just for reference here, so it says in the Hudson Valley that the mean household income was $128,000. The median income in the mid-Hudson Valley is $75,000, so significantly higher than the median income. And although neither of these studies included information on CSA farmer demographics, we know from census data that at least 95% of American farmers are white, and that an even higher percent of farmland acres are owned by white people. We also know that many CSA farmers want to expand equity in their CSA programs. So in our latest survey of CSA Coalition farms in the Hudson Valley, 44% of respondents indicated that one of their primary goals was to diversify membership of their CSA. And while 81% indicated that they currently do not accept SNAP payments, 70% of those people said that they're very interested in being able to do so. I'm not going to dive too deeply into successful examples of equity in CSA. I should refer you here to my colleague Garrett's presentation, which took place in September of 2020, another Ideas Lab called CSA as a Vehicle for Food Access. I know Liv mentioned it as well. But I did want to just mention a few noteworthy examples. Fair Share CSA Coalition has had partner shares for a long time, both partial and full subsidies of CSA shares, and they fundraise through private donations, and we've heard of people doing that across the country. A lot of CSA operations will also use a sliding scale model in which people self-identify their income bracket and are charged a certain amount based on that identified bracket. CSA is a SNAP, is a project through the Hudson Valley CSA Coalition that is currently supported by a USDA GUSNIP grant. And through that, we established a rotating fund so that we can still pay CSA farms upfront for the cost of their shares. And then over the course of the CSA season, members paying with SNAP can pay on a weekly basis and at a 50% discount, which ultimately will go back into the fund so we can continue the program season after season. There are also plenty of farms that have working share options where people can volunteer or work in exchange for a discounted or free share. And other examples of equity efforts include payment plans where people pay in installments over the course of the season, doorstep delivery, thus eliminating geographic barriers, donating a certain number of shares to pantry programs every year, etc. While all of these efforts increase the accessibility of CSA, none of them are perfect, and we know that CSA remains a model prohibitive to many. We also know that it's frankly unfair to ask CSA farmers to solve this problem when the causes of inequity in the food system are structural and in an ideal world would be addressed at the federal level. Despite the fact that benefits of CSA are hard to realize when trying to enact an equitable structure, CSA farmers are still incredibly creative in finding ways to feed everyone in their community while remaining financially viable. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that farmers are so resilient and innovative and committed to their communities. And I have a lot of gratitude for that. Next slide, please. Now looking forward, what's going to come of CSA? On the left here, I have a list of what we know, what we've just talked about, that CSA has a robust global history, that the economic model is highly popular and successful among small-scale diversified farmers, but can be financially prohibitive to many. We also know that once people learn about CSA and sign up for a share, they're very likely to love it, to sign up again, and also to spread the word. So in marketing, we call it a net promoter score. We know that CSA members largely are very excited to promote their CSA on behalf of the farmers, and that retention rates are often well over 50%, maybe even over 75%. We also discussed that the current makeup of CSA members and farmers could be much more diverse than it is, but that CSA farmers want to expand and diversify their CSA membership. And now on the right, looking forward, it's hard to know exactly what's coming, but here are some of the things that we know will impact CSA in the future. CSA trends are always changing. We saw a huge increase in popularity of CSA at the onset of the pandemic, but that has already fluctuated somewhat. Legislation will impact how our food system works. So there's a farm bill coming in 2023, and that and other legislation will impact federal benefits and how many people are able to readily access local fresh food. We've seen a lot of trends change with the pandemic and with food insecurity. And we know that the ongoing economic impacts of the pandemic are going to be very long, especially for those who are most insecure. Climate change is also impacting how people consume and how farmers grow the food. And finally, there's a lot of evolution within the CSA model. Although farmers, consumers, and technical assistance providers, including the CSA Innovation Network, try to define what CSA is, it's a relatively young concept that has evolved a lot in the past few decades, and I'm sure that it will continue to change in new, exciting ways that we can't necessarily predict. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to thank you for listening. I'm sure that some of you have put questions in the chat box. I'll check with Liliana and Liv to see if we have time for people to ask questions right now. And you'll see my email address is at the bottom of this slide, as well as some of the many sources that I used when compiling my history of CSA. So thank you.
Huge thanks to Kate for such a comprehensive, thorough history of CSA. I just want to say thanks for sharing all your experience with us. This is really valuable. And then some other relevant resources. A number of folks, when you registered, were interested in like the specific logistics of, creating an incentive program, a cost offset program, processing SNAP for your CSA, and some of those more brass tacks for your CSA farm or nonprofit. I will once again point you to the previous ideas lab that we held on different models that can look like, as well as point you to the CSA Innovation Network's resource library, which has a lot of curated resources specifically for CSA farmers and support organizations. I'm thinking of a big guide that Zinger Farms produced on, processing SNAP as a CSA farm, and lots of very, very good information there. So, and then just stay tuned. A lot of your feedback today, a lot of what we heard today will inform the direction of resource creation and ideas labs in the future. And so we really value the time that you took to share today, and have an open door, open inbox for anything that comes to you after you hop off the line. So thank you all. At this point, I think we're gonna formally end the session. If anyone wants to stay on the line and ask any questions, feel free to do so. But without anything else, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next session.